Hi, Bill Federer here. And on this episode of How We Got Here, I thought I would look at media and its influence on our republic. Disney's been in the news in Florida. It has been pushing a trans agenda. The leader of Disney said they want to introduce more trans characters, and the company actually wanted to get involved in the political process in Florida, and the governor Ron DeSantis decided to pull the special tax status that the Disney World complex had. They were working on a cartoon where a woman was impregnated by Satan, and the child was the Antichrist. And they had produced several sample episodes of this, and they were about to release it when enough Christians made an issue over it. But why is media so important in a republic? Well, one of the things that we have to look at is that for most of the world's history, you have kings. And where there's a king, if you have an agenda, you got to get in to see him. And so, for example, in China, they had Mandarin eunuchs, and they kept concubines, 2,000 of them, for the emperor. And if you wanted to meet with the emperor to pitch your agenda, you would bribe the mandarins and they would help arrange a meeting. Well, in Athens, there was no emperor. Athens was a democracy, about 6,000 citizens. And if you have an agenda, how do you pitch it to the whole city? Well, that's when they would invent theater, right? And so they would get the whole city together in a big outdoor amphitheater. I went to school in Europe in college, and we went to these Greek amphitheaters up in Delphi and the Ephesus and these different areas. And they are built with acoustics. And so the way it's designed, you can be in the front and talk in a whisper, and you can actually hear it in the top row. They're amazing structures. Anyway, so these Greeks would put on plays, and the entire city would be there. And the plays were called comedies, tragedies, and satires. And the comedies, you read them, it's like Saturday Night Live. They would literally make fun of living politicians and rib them and just ridicule them. You'd leave the theater saying, "Oh, I don't want to be like that poor fellow." And you would back away from them and from everything they stood for. And then in the tragedies, they would extol as virtuous certain individuals, and they gave their life and they were so noble. And you leave the theater saying, "Oh, I want to be remembered like that guy." And it was a way to manipulate and push an opinion on an entire city of people at one time. And so from that time till now, theater is always political. Media, Disney, anything that can be viewed as entertainment, but it's actually pushing a message. And they make the ones that they want to have you adopt their views as the heroes. They're cute, they're funny, and then the ones that they want to diminish that viewpoint, they make them look like backwards and simpletons and so forth. I mean, think of your favorite show, your favorite sitcom, your favorite movie, and there's a character you like, you identify with. They're the funny one or the cute one or the pretty one or the courageous one or the hero one. And you find yourself apologizing for them when they do something wrong. Like, I know James Bond is with a woman he's not married to, but he's about to save the world. So can we get on with the story? And it minimizes something that used to be important to you, marital fidelity. And then again, they portray people that hold old traditional values as backwards and simpletons and idiots and even hateful. And you turn off the TV saying, yeah, that person, they did look really like they were too strict. And the other ones, they were so cool, I want to wear their perfume or their tennis shoes, right? And so from that time till now, from Athens until now, wherever the people are the ruling power, what happens is you want to influence the people, and they do it through media, through Disney. Now, the Declaration of Independence says we're a government from the consent of the governed. But what if you could engineer consent? Well, there was a gentleman named Edward Bernays that wrote a book called Engineering Consent. And he was a marketer. And he wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. And he said, the engineering of consent is the very essence of a democratic process, freedom to persuade and suggest. And And so in his book, Propaganda, 1928, by the way, he's a nephew of Sigmund Freud, that psychoanalyst. But he talks about women go into a department store and think they're picking out shoes. They're not. The shoes were picked out for them by the marketing executive who paid the actors to put them on, who paid the photographer to take the pictures, who paid for the magazine ad campaigns. And the women see the shoes in the ad and they want them. And he writes this: the larger manufacturer of women's shoes has a popular actress wear the shoes. The fashion spreads. The man who injected this idea into the shoe industry was ruling women in one department of their social lives. And then he goes on that today a minority has discovered powerful help in influencing the majority to mold the minds of the masses. They find in propaganda a tool which is increasingly powerful, regimenting the public mind. Now he later begins to change the name from propaganda to public relations, a little more familiar. And he says, in almost every act of our daily life, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or ethical thinking, we are dominated by a relatively small number of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And then in his book, The Engineering of Consent, he says the manipulation of the opinion of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the country. Years ago, I was with Senator Rick Santorum, and he said, I've come to the conclusion that politics is downstream from culture. In other words, we put all this effort into getting people elected, but he says, if you can influence culture, you end up influencing the views of the people, which influence the elections. And so there is a pattern of a minority influencing a majority. It's even in the Bible. So you have the entire nation coming to the borders of the promised land, and a minority go in, and just 10 of the spies spread an evil report, and it's the land and devours its inhabitants, and we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And this minority manipulated the majority, the entire nation, to panic and fear, and they didn't get to go into the promised land. And then again, you have the people of Jerusalem loving Jesus. He comes in and they have a parade for him, right? He's on the donkey and they're putting palm branches out. And within a week, you have a minority, the chief priests, manipulating the majority to do what? To cry out for Jesus to be crucified. So a minority controlling a majority, and they do it through media, they do it through Hollywood, they do it through Disney, they do it through plays. And if you think of it as a domino effect, the country's controlled by laws. Well, laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters, and voters are controlled by public opinion. I mean, you can't vote for someone you don't know about, and what you know about is told to you by the media. Actually, media in the short run, but then education in the school system in the long run. And then churches, historically, they've influenced public opinion, and now it's been going down, but it's still one of the elements. And then now the internet, and everybody's using the internet. So if they can censor certain views on the internet and promote others, that's manipulating the masses. When the World War II ended, you had Stalin and you had Soviet communists wanting to take over countries with tanks. And there was a person named Antonio Gramsci that said, no, you can't defeat the West with tanks. You have to do it slow and rot it from the inside. And it was nicknamed the Long March Through the Institutions. And Antonio Gramsci got on the wrong side of those socialists, was put in a prison in Italy where he dies. But he writes his prison notebooks, and he says the civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot be overthrown until those roots are cut. Why? Judeo-Christian values emphasize the individual, that you have a worth because you individually are made in the image of God. They don't like individual stuff. Socialism is a group concept, and they use group dynamics of acceptance or rejection from the group to manipulate you. And so it's this concept where they wanted to infiltrate the arts, the business, the education, family, government, media, religion. And ironically enough, those areas were already controlled by Christians who gave them up. But in 1963, you had a Congressman, Albert Herlong, and he reads into the congressional records these tactics that the communists were doing. And some of them say things like get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda. This is 1963, they wrote this. Get control of teachers' associations, put party line in textbooks, infiltrate the press, gain control of key positions in the radio, TV, infiltrate churches, replace revealed religion with social religion, like social justice and Black Lives Matter and so forth. And so the battle is for your mind. You are a spirit-minded body. So your spirit loves God. Your body hates God. Your body is fleshly. And your soul is the decider. Are you going to go with the flesh or are you going to go with the spirit? And so the battle for the mind, in the 19th century, you had a German military theorist named Clausewitz. And he gave the classic definition for the purpose of war. The purpose of war is to force your opponent to submit to your will. So you're killing their bodies. Why? Because their mind is loyal to the other side. What if you could just mess with their mind? Get them to be disloyal, get them to be confused, get them to be disheartened and disillusioned. And so this battle for the mind was even mentioned in Sun Tzu's Art of War, 5th century BC. He was a Chinese military strategist. He gives all this advice on war, but then he says supreme excellence in a commander is to get your enemy to surrender without a fight. In other words, you defeat them in their mind, you psych them out. And now it's called 5th generation warfare, where you get your enemy to surrender without them even being aware they're in a war, right? So if the goal is to get them to submit, what if you could just get them to submit without them even realizing they're in a war, right? And so that's where we're at today. They're getting people to submit and give up their freedoms. In World War II, they call it psychological operations or cognitive warfare or psyops. And we did it in Germany, dropping pamphlets out of airplanes in the German language over villages that says, your side has already lost, your commander just hasn't told you. And it's like, why are we out there fighting if we've already lost? And it messes with their mind. Well, the Japanese did that to us with Tokyo Rose, right? The radio waves could go across the Pacific Ocean relatively easily. And she was this woman with a very seductive voice. She would say, you Americans are so terrible. You're doing these terrible things. And guys would listen to it and would just be like disheartened. And now it's even another story in the Bible is Gideon. He has the situation where there's 100,000 Midianites invading Israel. And he gets 30,000 Israelites. And God said, tell everyone that's scared to go home. In other words, I can't have fear. Fear will dishearten. So he gets down to 10,000. And God says, still too many. Give me 300. And, they drink from a creek and so forth. So God says, I can do more with just 300 with no fear than with 30,000, where half of them are in fear. And so they surround the Midianite army at nighttime. They break the clay pitchers, the torches shine, they blow the trumpets, and the Midianites are defeated in their minds. They get up in the dark and they bump into each other, and then they start pulling out their swords and they start chopping each other because they can't tell who's the enemy and who's not. Well, they're all the enemy, and they end up defeating themselves. And so the main tactic is manipulating the human desire for acceptance or rejection by a group. And so you want to wear the shoes that everybody else is wearing. You want to also adopt the views that everybody else is holding. And so it goes down to the basic human desire to be accepted and the fear of being rejected. Nobody wants to be not invited to a party. Nobody wants to be the last person picked for the team, right, or whatever. And so they've weaponized that desire. So a water molecule is individual, but you put it with other water molecules and they operate as a group, big waves. A fish in a bowl, but you put it with other fish, it operates in a group. They can turn in really pretty patterns. And a bird in a cage, but you put it with other birds, they operate in a group. Well, guess what? We are humans as individuals, but you put us together with other humans and we operate as a group. We're constantly giving and receiving feedback if we're being accepted or rejected. And so they've weaponized that. Most of the world calls it honor shame culture. But in Islam, if a daughter embarrasses her family in front of the group, they'll murder their own daughter. Saul Alinsky, community organizer, says ridicule is man's most potent weapon. Right, so everybody it fears being ridiculed in front of a group. And now, the Korean War, you had people going in, loving America, coming out, hating America. And they said, what happened to these guys? Well, they would isolate them until they craved wanting to get back into a group and get emotional reinforcement, the buddy slap on the back. And when they were at this vulnerable psychological state, they would bring them into a group. But before they could be accepted in the group, they had to reject America and confess their whiteness and confess they were part of this evil Western capitalist system. And once they did, they got that buddy treatment, and it cemented the views in their emotions. And so this concept, they actually did a study in the 1970s on college campuses called the Asch conformity experiment. And they would pull 8 students into a room. 7 had been paid ahead of time to be actors. 1 was a naive participant. And the teacher would put 2 cards on the front desk. 1 card had 1 line, and the other card had 3 lines. And one by one, they would go around, and the paid actor students would convincingly say that the shorter line was equal to that first line. By the time it got around to the 8th naive participant, 30% of them would deny their own eyes to fit in with the group. They're looking at the lines. They are not equal, but they'll say, maybe they know something I don't know, and they would doubt their perception. And so now if just one other person disagreed, it went from 30% down to 5%. But the fear of being kicked out of a group, it's even in the Bible. Peter was with Jesus for 3 years, and he looks Jesus in the eye, says, I'll never deny you. 12 hours later, Peter's with a group around a fire. A girl gets in his face and says, you were with Jesus? And you can just picture Peter looking around the group, and everybody's eyeing him. And he says, I never met the guy. It's like, that's it, Peter? You caved that fast? The fear of being rejected from a group is a real fear. But after the resurrection, Peter's filled with the Holy Spirit. And the Sanhedrin says, we told you never to speak in his name again. And Peter says, it's better to obey God rather than men. Suddenly, Peter doesn't care what the group says. All he cares about is what God says. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this examination of Disney and media and the idea of wanting to manipulate your perception of what the group and the country believes, and to encourage you that the Bible says, do not be among a multitude running to do evil. So even though a group is wanting to do evil, God wants you to stand up and have backbone and stand up for him. Anyway, God bless you. Have a great day.